Welcome back to Murder in the Black. It is your host, Steph.
And I'm MD.
And we wanted to give a quick announcement just to our regular weekly listeners. MD and I have been trying to get on a rhythm. Last week, I said that we had a family emergency, and that family emergency is that our dad, who has been featured on our podcast several times, and he was the voice that says, "This is Steph and MD." Yeah, that guy. He's been hospitalized twice, and it definitely has thrown us off our rockers, and we're trying to adjust while being mothers and working and being there for our parents. Shout out to our dad. He's back at home and he's resting, and that's why you guys have seen not delays on Thursday, but there was some delays on our paid subscription. That's just hey, pray for us, send some good thoughts our way.
And give us a little grace as we try to find a new rhythm in this season. We will get back together and get it working and things churning the way that it used to, even better. But we're trying to find some balance right now.
Right. Let's go ahead and get into our true crime case for today.
So grab your coffee if it's the morning, your lemonade if it's the afternoon, and your wine if it's the evening. But either way, let's get into it. Our case for today is called Chasing Shadows, and it's the case of Avis Banks.
This is a listener suggestion. Shout out to DeWitt, who has been with us, for so long. He's always giving us suggestions, always showing us love. We appreciate this listener choice, and if you guys are interested in giving us some cases, send them our way.
Send them our way, because this was a great one, DeWitt. Thank you. Exhausted from the day and ready to get home and unwind, Avis Banks clocked out of her job as a daycare teacher around 5:10 p.m. on November 29, 2006, and headed to her house that she shared with her fiancé, Keyon Pittman. Avis was 5 months pregnant, and she was ready to kick up her feet, eat dinner, and enjoy the rest of her day, like we all do at the end of our work day. She hopped into her car, and at 5:36 p.m., she called her fiancé, Keyon, because she needed to figure out what were the dinner plans, because that's the most important thing at the end of the working day. What are we eating? This call would be the last call Avis would make. Avis pulled in front of her house. She grabbed the mail, got out of the mailbox, and drove her car into the garage. As she exited the car, she was ambushed. She was shot and stabbed several times. Avis laid on the garage floor, the door to her car still open, mail still in her hand, purse still on her shoulder. She stood no chance against this vicious attack. 27-year-old Avis Banks was born and raised in Vicksburg, Mississippi. She was the middle daughter of Fred and Deborah Banks. She was the first in her immediate and extended family to graduate college, and she didn't just do it by the skin of her chin. She did it with honors, cum laude. She had beauty and brains, and she was determined to be successful. She was loved by all that knew her. She met the love of her life, Keyon Pittman, in the winter of 2004 at a gym. They hit it off immediately, mainly because they both had a love for teaching the future generation. Keyon Pittman was a teacher and basketball coach at Chastain Middle School, and he often dedicated his non-working hours to volunteering to help the children in his community and at his school. This won Avis over, and eventually her and Keyon bought a house together and they moved in. Shortly thereafter, she got pregnant, and in the fall of 2006, Keyon asked Avis to marry him. They were preparing for a February wedding and eagerly awaiting the birth of their son. On the surface, Avis's life seemed to be going well. Her family adored Keyon. She had a home in the suburbs of Jackson, Mississippi, an upcoming wedding, and a baby on the way. But the cracks in their love story began to rear its ugly head on Thanksgiving Day in 2006. Now, Avis's family recounts that on Thanksgiving, Keyon seemed distracted. His phone was constantly ringing. He was texting incessantly, and he even excused himself several times to go take phone calls. This was very strange to Avis's family because he was always very attentive, very engaging. I mean, that was the reason they fell in love with him. And they also recalled that Avis seemed uncomfortable by all these calls and text messages, and she even seemed a little bit irritated, but she didn't call Keyon out on this behavior.
Little did her family know, but this behavior would make sense to them in the days to come following her murder, because just a few short hours after Avis was brutally murdered in her garage, her husband Keyon would find her lifeless body, and the race to find out who done it. It would uncover a life of secrets. On the afternoon of November 29th, Keyon Pittman went to the grocery store. He purchased a few items, and then he went home and went to the home of Carla Hughes. He had a key to her apartment, so he let himself in and stored his groceries in her refrigerator. He called Carla and notified her that he left groceries in her house and would return to get them after his basketball practice. Keyon went on to basketball practice, which started at 5:30 p.m. and ended at 7:45 p.m. On his way to practice, he spoke with Avis twice. Once when she got off work at 5:12 p.m. and then again at 5:36 p.m. when she was driving home. After practice, he went back to Carla's house where he stayed for about 20 to 30 minutes. He left at 8:30 p.m. While he was driving home, he called Avis, but she didn't answer. So he called her mother and asked if she had talked to Avis. Her mother said no. When he arrived home, he pulled in the front, opened the garage, and saw Avis lying in a pool of blood on the area floor next to her car. He ran to her and tried to arouse her, but she did not respond. He checked the house to see if anyone was there, and then he ran next door, where a neighbor called 911. And I'm going to get back to the story. MD, I just want to ask you, if someone like your husband doesn't pick up the phone, is your next call to his friend or who someone is close to him? Is that normal for you? Because in this situation, Keyon didn't hear from her, called her once, and then called her mom.
Yeah, no, I think that was it's very strange. I wouldn't do that. But I also think that, depending on your routine and
Sure.
what you're used to doing. Like if typically I call you on my way home and you answer and you talk to me on the drive home, maybe it does cause me to be concerned. I don't know if it would cause me to be so concerned that now I'm going to call your friend or your mom or whoever you're close to. I think that it would just make me concerned. I may even call back. I don't think that I would necessarily go to the next step of calling the parent. And in this case, Steph, the mom was interviewed about it, Avis's mom, and she even said that it was unusual for him to call her and ask, have you talked to Avis? I think that it is unusual.
Right.
Both for me, it's unusual. I wouldn't do it. But I think even in this circumstance, the mom said it was unusual.
Yeah, what's so interesting is that you hear about all these different oddities that happen in true crime cases, and usually, now this is where it's not a golden rule, but usually people find oddities and they say that's unusual for them, but they rationalize why that may have happened. And I think that's just a normal instinct that we all have. Like, oh, he usually picks up the phone, but maybe got busy, maybe something else happened, let me call again. So I just want to bring you guys' attention to that. He runs back to Avis as he already went and told the neighbor to call 911, and he held her until the police arrived around 8:46 p.m. The paramedics pronounced Avis dead on scene. Investigators began the investigation into who killed Avis Banks. They noticed that the rear entry of the house was kicked in. The police were able to lift 2 good footprints from the back door, which is amazing. I'm always amazed when they're able to get good forensics.
Like too good. Like they were quality, a full print of the foot. And they got 2 of them, not just 1, but 2.
There were blood smears along the wall and a light switch plate. There was a bullet hole in the lower left corner of the garage door, but no shell casings were found. They noticed quickly that this was a staged burglary. Every other drawer in the master bedroom was pulled open. In the bathroom, the medicine cabinets and places where you store cleaning supplies were open. Unusual if you're trying to rob somebody.
I mean, like, who is looking, like, if I'm robbing a house, I know that typically drawers in the bathroom are going to be where towels are and cleaning supplies are and medicine is. I'm not going to even waste my time there. I'm going to go other places. But every drawer in the bathroom was open, while in the bedroom, only every other drawer was open. So you was just like, 1, skip that drawer, 2, skip that drawer, 3. What?
Like, I mean,
it just looks so staged to the investigators. They were like, this is not
investigators. This is staged.
Right.
Clearly.
Right.
Additionally, nothing was taken. The perpetrator also pulled Avis's pants down to appear as if there was a sexual assault. However, the autopsy revealed that there was no assault conducted on Avis. This was a whole staged ambush that resulted in her murder, which caused them to believe that, was she a target? She obviously was targeted. What happened?
Avis was shot 4 times, of which 3 of the shots were fatal. The stab wounds were not fatal, however, because according to the medical examiner, they were likely conducted post-mortem. After she had already died, the perpetrator stabbed her several times.
So overkill at that point.
Absolutely overkill. Because 3 of the shots were already, any one of the 3 shots would have killed her. And yet you still shot her 4 times, and then you pulled out a knife and stabbed her. All of the bullets were determined to be from a .38 caliber weapon. The autopsy confirmed that she was in her 2nd trimester of pregnancy, carrying a male baby, and because the baby died from maternal demise, his death was also classified as a homicide. Now, as with many cases, police look to the husband, or in this case, the fiancé. They immediately bring Keyon down to the station. They photographed his clothes because he had blood on them, and they processed his hands for gunshot residue. They found that he had a single particle of gunshot residue on each hand. I want to just stop here because there is a difference between gunshot residue and gunshot burn. And gunshot residue you can get from if I'm touching the victim, or I hold a victim, even if I hold a gun that may have been fired, but I didn't necessarily fire the actual weapon, you can get gunshot residue. However, gunshot burn means that you shot the gun that actually, fired. And so the fact that he did have gunshot residue was not conclusive that he shot the gun. And it also wasn't conclusive that he didn't shoot the gun, because maybe he washed his hands. So and I think it also just goes to show that the fact that it was only a single particle of gunshot residue just really didn't look like he necessarily fired the weapon. Although all of this was true, they still questioned him extensively. Now, initially, Keyon, he was very cooperative. He answered their questions, was trying to give them as much information as they were looking for. But police were bothered by his demeanor, because although at the crime scene, he appeared to be quite emotional, he was hollering, they also noticed that he wasn't crying. So although he was screaming for Avis and making very loud communication about Avis, there were no tears necessarily coming from his eyes. However, when he got to the police station, it was a stark contrast. He was very calm. He was observed to be collected. And they even noticed that he was laughing at times. This was very odd to the detectives. And Steph, what are your thoughts about that difference in behavior from going from screaming about your fiance who's dead on the scene to being observed to be very calm and collected even?
We've talked extensively about how your demeanor does not then translate to guilt, that you have anything to do with it at all. What's so interesting going through this situation with my dad, I have come to realize that I'm a processor. I need time to process my emotions, how I feel. And so my demeanor by default sits at calm. Just, staring. I might look a little agitated, but for the most part, you won't really be able to read my emotion if you don't know me, right? Like to a police officer, I might look like my demeanor is peaceful and what's wrong with you? And it has come to my understanding through this particular situation with my dad that this is often the case with other people. And why I have intellectually been able to explain that before, it's another thing to be able to empathize with it and to feel it. I think that to see his demeanor and to see a stark change, he could have just been shocked. I mean, he just found his fiance, who was carrying his child in her second trimester, dead. He might have been groaning, not crying, but then he gets to the police station and now he's shocked. Like,
right. He's probably hasn't fully processed or accepted the fact that she isn't there. And a detective even remarks that he said to Keyon at one point, your fiance and your son, like, they're dead. And Keyon says, oh yeah. It's possible that it just hasn't fully set in. But another thing that they observed is that Keyon actually made a phone call to someone while he was sitting in the interrogation room. And you got to understand that in this day and age, it's all being recorded. Okay, so you may be in there by yourself and nobody's in there talking to you, but please know that there is video that is recording and watching your every move. And so he's making phone calls, and on one of these calls, whoever he's talking to, he calls them babe. B-A-B-E.
And, I know we say babe, like, people say babe to the same sex, and I may not know you, but like, I like your shoes, babe. But I don't have an explanation for that behavior.
Yeah, that and the police did not have an explanation for that.
You're on your own, Keyon.
And as if they didn't already think he was involved, they certainly did now. But as they begin to get to the heart of the questions, Keyon lawyers up and refuses to talk to the detectives anymore. And kudos to him, because what do I say? Innocent or guilty, get an attorney and be quiet, right? So that's exactly what Keyon does. Now, the detectives set out to figure out how Keyon was involved in this crime because they know at the core of their heart, they know that he's involved. But as they dug deeper into the evidence, it just wasn't placing him the evidence wasn't placing him at the crime scene. You see, the investigation concluded that Avis arrived home between 5:50 and 6 p.m. and that she had been killed shortly thereafter. Now, Keyon's cell phone records conclusively place him 15 to 20 miles away at Chastain Middle School during this time. It would be next to impossible for him to be at his house during the time of the murder because at 5:12 p.m. and 5:36 p.m., he spoke with Avis. And during those calls, the cell phone towers ping him 20 miles away.
However, what they did find in their investigation is that Keyon was an unfaithful man. He was a player. He was outside. And he was cheating on Avis. Okay. Avis seemed to know something was off because a few days before she was killed, she sent a text that said, I'm doing everything I can to make it work. But how would you feel if I were on the phone all night long? For Avis's family, this text confirmed that Keyon was not the man they believed him to be. They felt he was a phony. And at Avis's funeral, her family describes Keyon as simply hollering, not crying. Sound familiar? It sounds like he put on that same Oscar-winning performance for The Police. He was showing no emotion. Avis's older sister called him out for it, and a fight almost broke out. I cannot imagine the heightened emotion that her family was feeling. To find out that the person they thought was with their sister, daughter, cousin, was not the person that they knew. And a lot of times, it's interesting. I think a lot of times when we think about giving someone away at a wedding, we're talking about the parents because they literally give their child away. But as a sister, you're giving your sister away. As a brother, you're trusting that person who you probably more than likely have gotten to know over the years to safeguard their heart. And to find out that that person didn't is obviously not just a betrayal that they had to experience, but they also had to experience the death of Avis. I mean, it was just a combustion waiting to happen.
It's layered, and as a big sister, right? Because this is her big sister that just popped off. And as a big sister, I can totally appreciate the anger. And they loved Keyon. Like, they really did. Her dad was talking about how, prior to Keyon, he would chase off all these other men that would try to get at his daughter. But when Keyon came along, he was like, this is a good guy. This is a guy, he got his head on his shoulders. He's doing the right things. Like, Keyon played not just Avis, but he played her family, and he convinced them that he was somebody that he truly wasn't. And Avis's sister, her older sister, when she learned of the details of the murder, she said to her father, this was not a man that killed my sister. A woman did this. And when they learned of that text message, she knew in her gut, she knew that it was a result of Keyon and his unfaithful ways. She just knew. She didn't have any facts. She had none to believe it. She wasn't an investigator. She didn't know the details. She just knew. Her gut told her. At that funeral, when he was just hollering, showing no emotion, acting like he was really broken, she was like, I can't do it. You're not going to sit here in this funeral and act like you cared about my sister when you dogged her in real life. You dogged her. Whether you had something to do with this or not, you dogged my sister. And if it wasn't for those police officers breaking that fight up and kicking him out the funeral, we may be celebrating. Well, I was going to say celebrating, but we may have, there may have been another funeral.
It might have been, right. Keyon's secrets were coming out little by little, inch by inch. He had multiple relationships with different women. One woman was a 30-year-old married woman named Brenda Martin. She was the mother of one of his basketball players. Their relationship was still in the beginning phases. He was, working his way into good graces, trying to cheat. God, I didn't know there were levels. They would flirt through texts and phone calls, and when the police paid Brenda a visit, she quickly provided an alibi that checked out, and her cell phone records definitively placed her elsewhere at the time of the murder. And I'm sure she was just like, you know what? See, I hope she got it together and made her marriage work. Brenda. The things that were going on in her mind when she heard about that, like.
Can you imagine? She was like, oh my God, like, I will be faithful the rest of my life. Like, because I was trying to have an affair, but I wasn't trying to go to jail.
Right. Like, oh my goodness. That checked her off the list. But Brenda, as we just stated, wasn't the only one that was trying to be the only one, because he didn't want only one. He did not want just one person. What? He was also messing around with the 25-year-old single mother, Carla Hughes, the same Carla Hughes that he dropped his groceries off on the day of the murder. That one, he had a key to her apartment. Now, unlike Brenda, this relationship was a little bit more serious. He invested a lot more time here. Detectives even uncovered that this is the woman he called while Keyon was in the station. The one he called, babe. And he didn't just call her while he was in the station, but he called her before the neighbor called 911 that night. The police believe that Carla was their ticket to bringing down Keyon. They bring her in for questioning because they believe at this time Keyon did it. When they began to question Carla, she started crying uncontrollably, which was odd to the police. They asked her why was she crying, and she said because her friend's fiance was dead.
Now, Steph, I want to stop you there before you finish talking about her her interrogation. Do you think that you would cry behind somebody that you like uncontrollably? I can see myself because I am very empathetic. I'm the person that cries about people I don't know and strangers all the time on the internet. But if somebody brought me into the station to question me about a crime that happened, about a person that I didn't have a relationship with or didn't know, would you be crying uncontrollably the way that they describe that? Is that normal to you? Would that be odd to you?
Yeah, I think so. Because at this point, they don't know that they're in any type of relationship. That would be even more odd. But, I mean, at this point, you don't know anything. I mean, you might feel bad, but outside of that, it seems weird.
Yeah, it seemed really weird to me when I heard that she was crying uncontrollably. I don't understand what. I can see you shedding some tears. Wow, like a woman lost her life and she was pregnant, but they said she was crying so uncontrollably they were not able to question her at that time. Like they had to wait till she calmed down.
Once she got control, she described her relationship with Keyon as simply friends. Told them that they met at Chastain Middle School where they were both teachers. Finally, after more pushing and prodding, she confessed that their relationship was more than just friends, but she stated that it was a sexual relationship, and in her mind, it was just a casual fling. She even stated that Avis was aware of her and that Avis didn't care. She didn't want Keyon to leave Avis, and she never asked him to, which makes it even more weird that you're over here crying about his fiance. Like, did you think that was going to give you a point? Avis didn't care why you're cheating with her husband. Okay. At the conclusion of the interview with the police, they asked her if she owned a gun. She stated no. They asked her if she had access to a gun, and she said no. My father is a hunter. He has a lot of guns, but I don't have any. Interesting thing that she offered, right? The police ended the interview with more questions than answers, with the biggest question of all being, does Carla know more than what she is saying?
A few days later, they would have the answer to this question when an attorney for a young man named Patrick Nash called the police with evidence that would send this case straight to trial. On November 26, 2006, Patrick Nash received a call from his cousin, Carla Hughes. She asked if they could meet up because she needed his help. And Patrick adored his cousin, and he would do anything for her. So he was like, yeah, let's hook up. And when they met up, Carla asked Patrick if she could borrow a weapon for protection because her apartment had quite a few attempted break-ins, and she wanted to have something just in case she was home during another one of these attempts. He loaned Carla his .38 caliber gun with 5 bullets inside and a 3.5 to 4 inch long folding hunting knife. When he gave her the gun, he showed her how to use it. She thanked him and they went their separate ways. Then on December 1st, 2006, and I just want to make sure you guys are tracking with me because he gave her this weapon on November 26th, which is 3 days before the murder. Then on December 1st, an hour after she had been interviewed by the police. Now, just let that sit there. 1 hour after the police asked her, do you have a gun? Do you have access to a gun? And they ended that interview. An hour later, she goes to Patrick and she returns the .38 caliber gun. And when he looks inside, the gun is empty. Remember, he gave her the gun and it had 5 bullets. When she gives the gun back to him, there's no bullets inside. And she doesn't give him the knife back. When he sees that there's no bullets inside, he asked her what happened to the bullets. And she stated, I used it during target practice. But Patrick was very uneasy by all of this, by her answer, just this all set wrong with Patrick, because Carla called him the night that Avis was murdered and told him, hey, Keyon's girlfriend was murdered. He's like, this, and now you giving me this gun back, and then there's no bullets in this gun. You didn't give me the knife back. He just felt like this is not going in the right direction. Smart Patrick, you are smart, sir, calls his father, and he asked his father, like, what should I do? Like, this is the events. This is what happened. What do you think I should do? Patrick and his father, they approached Carla, and they asked her point blank, was this gun involved in the Avis Banks murder? And she drops her head and shrugs her shoulders. So they both take that to mean that affirmatively, it was involved, this gun was involved, and they didn't want no parts of this. They were like, you know what? I'm not going to jail for you. I love you. You my cousin. You are my niece. But I am not going to jail for you. They called their attorney. Somebody just clapped for them in the audience.
Let the church say amen.
And amen.
This is how you should handle it.
This is how you handle it.
Don't go straight to the police. Go to your attorney.
And I want to know from you guys in the audience, this is your cousin. Would you protect your interest and call your attorney and confide in your attorney who has attorney-client privilege? Your attorney can't go turn you in or turn your cousin in. But would you do this? Would you do what Patrick did, or would you just sit on it and just say, I hope this never comes out? I'm interested to know your thoughts. But they call their attorney, and their attorney advises them, listen, you've got to turn this gun into the police, and you need to provide a statement to the police as to what occurred, because otherwise, if this gun ever comes back to you, you could be implicated as an accessory after the fact. Regardless of the fact that you knew nothing about the crime, weren't there, didn't pull the trigger, you could be implicated. And so they listened. They listened to their attorney, and they took this information straight to the police.
The police were shocked to hear the details because while they thought Carla knew more about this crime, they didn't think she was involved. But as any good detective should do, regardless of what you may think, you need to follow the evidence. And who would think Carla would be involved? She was just the mistress after all, right? Like, if anything, they didn't really feel like she had the motive. After all, she was the golden child of Greenville, Mississippi. She was adopted by her parents as an infant. She was their only child, and they lovingly doted on her. She excelled at everything she did. She was an honor roll student, played tennis, track, soccer, involved in student council, competed in pageants, and was a part of the mayor's youth council. She did everything. She was that kid in high school that I could not stand. Like, girl, what don't you do? I guess I was hating it just a little bit. She loved riding horses and even won the Mississippi State Championship. She wanted to be a teacher just like her parents. She graduated from college with honors, received her master's degree, and was working on her doctorate. She had a son from a previous failed relationship, but she was described as the kind of woman that would never give up on her dreams. She was not the type to be involved in a murder, or so everyone around her thought. But armed with this new information from Patrick Nash's attorney, the police arrest Carla and charge her with accessory after the fact. They attempted to make a plea deal with her, but she refused to implicate Keyon in the murder.
You know, Steph, what was really interesting about her refusal to implicate them is they actually have this recorded. One of the documentaries that we watched shows Carla talking to her attorney, and the attorneys and the police pulling her attorney out of the interrogation room to discuss a possible plea deal, and really just to arm him with as much evidence that they had against her. Like, hey, this is what we've got. This is what we have against her, and we really think that at this particular time, it's in her best interest to tell us all the information. And so the tape is still recording. Now, granted, they can't use this tape in trial. They can't use this tape against her because it's attorney-client privileged conversation. But nonetheless, it is recorded. And her attorney comes back in and he is pleading with her. Like, listen, if you got any information, like if you know anything, if you like give them what they need, basically. They're wanting you to flip on Keyon.
Because they really felt like Keyon was involved. You know, they didn't know at the time.
But she refused to do so.
So the police then search her apartment. This search reveals shoes that visually match the footprint, that great footprint that they found twice, on the back door of the crime scene. They sent the gun and the shoes off for forensic examination and upgraded her charges to first-degree murder.
She was charged with accessory after the fact because they didn't have any additional forensic evidence against her. They didn't have, they did have the gun, but they hadn't tested the gun. And they felt like, at most, even if she pulled the trigger, they didn't feel like she pulled the trigger, but they felt like at most at the time that she was just simply the mistress that was following the orders of Keyon. So at the time before they searched her house, they didn't have enough evidence to charge her with anything more.
Okay, so I get it. They were charging her with that as preliminary charges.
Exactly.
Like
we're gonna hold you because we can put the gun in your hands because it was your cousin. We know for a fact that your cousin gave you this gun, but we can't necessarily say that you pulled the trigger. We don't have enough evidence to say that you did that. At this time, we're just going to charge you with accessory after the fact, meaning you gave the gun, tried to hide the gun, tried to get rid of the gun. But when they went to her house and they found those shoes, at that point, they were like, she's involved.
It's all going down.
First-degree murder.
The ballistic report determined that this was the gun that fired the rounds that killed Avis. The shoes initially came back showing no DNA evidence. However, they sent it off to another lab, and that lab found microscopic DNA of Avis Banks' blood on the tread of the shoe. The shoe was also a match to the footprints lifted at the crime scene.
Cell phone records, which was the most damning evidence in this case, showed that at 5:37 p.m., right before Avis was killed, and at 6:05 p.m., after they believe Avis was killed, Carla received and called Keyon. Both of those calls pinged off the tower near the home of Avis Banks. It places Carla Hughes in the area of the murder. Her shoe print is found on the back door, and the gun that she borrowed from her cousin was used in the killing. However, at trial, she argued that it was not her that killed Avis, but that it was, in fact, Keyon. Now, although she never testifies at her trial, this was the defense's strategy to swayed reasonable doubt, because we know that the burden of proof in a criminal trial is beyond a reasonable doubt. Her attorneys tried to demonstrate that Keyon was a person that possibly could have committed these crimes. And they demonstrated that by showing that Keyon had a key to her house, that he borrowed Carla's shoes occasionally because she wore a size 10 woman's shoe, and a size 10 in women's is a size 8.5 in men's, and Keyon wore a size 8.5 in men's. So he could fit her shoes. And these are not just any old kind of shoes. They were just like some black, kind of like combat type shoes. They could be shoes that a guy would maybe possibly wear or put on. They showed that, there were times where, he would borrow her shoes. And they even had a witness that testified that Keyon wasn't at the gym the whole time during practice on the day of Avis's murder. However, the prosecution was able to impeach that witness, Steph. What that means is that they were able to show that he testified earlier to something different. Now, what a lot of you need to understand, and I've said this before, is that there is usually no gotcha moments at a trial. When a witness gets on the stand, both attorneys know exactly what this witness is likely to say because they've deposed that witness prior to them getting on the stand. This is typically how it works. And so this witness had been interviewed by the police prior to him getting on the stand. And in his initial interview with the police, which was just days after the murder, he told the police, yeah, Keyon was at practice the whole time. He was there. He was always at the gym. So the fact that now he's getting on stand, or the fact that this witness is now getting on the stand and saying, no, he wasn't there, basically the prosecution was able to show that he is not credible. And so his testimony really just didn't matter one way or the other because he's not credible. For a jury, they're going to listen to him and say, we can't really take anything he's saying for granted because he's lied. I don't know if he's lying now or if he lied then. His testimony is a wash.
He's a liar. It produces doubt.
The defense also tried to produce a witness who was a friend of Carla, who lived in the same area as Avis Banks. And they tried to show that, hey, Carla could have been going over to her house. But she gets on the stand and says, no, she didn't visit my house that day. She wasn't at my house. Now, ultimately, the jury found Carla guilty of 2 counts of capital murder, and she received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole.
Carla has since appealed her case and maintains her innocence. She insists that she was framed. Most recently, the Innocence Project has unearthed damning evidence against the medical examiner that testified in Carla's trial, Dr. Stephen Hain. He misrepresented his credentials under oath, ouch, and as a result was stripped of his medical license. He conducted a number of autopsies in cases which several convictions won in part or mostly due to his testimony. These cases have since been overturned due to questions about the validity of his testimony. According to an article from the Ninman law offices, they essentially said what, MD?
Essentially, they stated that two of the men that were convicted of rape and murder, due to Dr. Stephen Hain's testimony, were exonerated and released after serving nearly 20 years in prison. It's not just like this guy, had a couple of things to say, even though he wasn't really credentialed correctly, and, it didn't really matter. No, like his testimony actually convicted several people. And as a result of his testimony, people voted guilty when in reality, they weren't guilty. It's just crazy. And so what Carla has now essentially, what she's now essentially trying to do is say, well, he testified in my trial. He was the medical examiner in my trial. And so therefore, I should get a new trial. And so it all begs the question, and I'm going to ask Steph, and I want you guys to answer in the chat, should Carla Hughes have a new trial in light of these facts about Dr. Stephen Hain?
My answer is no, because, and I don't know if they have polled the jury that convicted her, but it sounds like just from what we saw in articles that the most damning piece of evidence was the cell phone records that pinged her near Avis's home, and the fact that she borrowed that gun from her cousin and she never gave back that knife.
And she returned the gun with no bullets. I mean, I think that in the cases where his testimony is the reason why the conviction happened, those are the cases that we're seeing new trials. And those are the cases where we're seeing these criminals or these people being exonerated, right? Because it hinged their guilt or innocence hinged totally and solely on his testimony, to which we are now questioning the validity of. Like, was he even accurate in his decisions on, or determinations, his findings? But in this case, it didn't hinge on his testimony. We know that Carla was shot 4 times. According to him, 3 of those shots were fatal. According to him, the stab wounds occurred post-mortem. that is not indicative of whether or not she shot the gun, whether or not she made the stabbings. Like, he didn't put the gun in her hand. The cousin did. That testimony still stands. He didn't place her cell phone at the scene of the crime. She did. Right. Her cell phone records show that.
So she's trying to use the law to her advantage. But the question then that I have, even if she is able to get that appeal granted, what new evidence do you have? Because you still going to be convicted a second time.
Right, because these cell phone records are still going to come in.
Right, like all of that damning evidence is still
these gun records, your cousin and your uncle testified against you at trial. So I just don't see how you get to be, and what I want to make clear is that there are errors that occur in trial, and when you go to appeal, the appellate court is judging whether those errors would, more likely than not, return a different verdict. And so even though there could be an error in his testimony and the autopsy results could prove to be inaccurate and would have a different result, what the appellate court has to determine is, well, in light of this error, would these same jurors, now hearing this new evidence about this autopsy, return a different result? And I think that the answer to that question is no. They would not return a different verdict. Because I think that the prosecution proved beyond a reasonable doubt, and I rarely say that in these cases, that she did this crime. I think the question that I now have for you, Steph, and also for you listening, is do you think Keyon was involved?
There's two things, right? I think there's two levels to that question. It's layered, which I like. But my first answer is, I do think that he is responsible for the murder of Avis. Because had he never had an affair, none of the things that were put into motion would have happened. By that very definition, he is guilty. He's the person who set the consequences of an affair into motion. But based on evidence and based on the law and the cell phone records and people's testimony, he was not there. Whether he whispered something in, her ear and said, hey, baby, if you do this, we can be together forever. And she was so gone in the head that she did it and still has not turned on him to this day. That's a possibility. But just in light of the evidence, just judging it based on the evidence, as True Crime Sleuths, we have to be, we should be at least fair and say, well, based on the evidence that has been presented, no. He's not guilty by the law standard. But morally, ethically, my guy is guilty.
I agree with you, Steph. I think there are so many things that you can sit with this. And there were some details that I didn't mention or that we didn't mention in the facts of this case. Like, one of the things that looks damning against him is that the neighbor said typically when Keyon would come home from work, he would park in the front of his house and he would enter into the front door. He never went in through the garage. Avis was the only one that would park, and she would open the garage and she would park in the garage and she would enter the house through the garage. He would always park in the front and enter through the front door. The night of the murder, he parked in front of the house. He did not turn his car off. The door to his car door was still open, and he opened the garage. He didn't attempt to go in through the front door, and the neighbor just noted, like, that's odd. And so I think it is odd. Does it say definitively that he had something to do with it? No. Does it say that he possibly knew about it after the fact? Because we do know that after practice, he went to pick his groceries up from Carla's house. He notes in trial transcript testimony, if you read the transcript, he does note on the stand that she was eerily quiet. Like, Carla was unusually quiet when he went back to her house after practice. And he was there for about 20 to 30 minutes. Maybe she made mention. Maybe he said some things. Maybe that's why it caused him to call her mom when she didn't answer the phone, because maybe she said something or didn't say something or acted a certain way that made him get scared about the fact that Avis may be hurt, because she had threatened to expose their relationship to Avis before, and he was able to kind of block it. she was stalking them, and she told him, I'm on my way to your house. And he said, he called her, he's like, you come, I'm calling the police. And she was able to stop it. So maybe there's a lot of maybes, right? There's a lot of maybes. And we don't know. I think it's interesting that you point out, Steph, that she still to this day has not implicated him. To this day, she has not turned on him in light of the fact that police have done everything while she was in prison, because she sat in prison for 2 years before this case went to trial. And a year into her sentence, or a year into her waiting for trial, the police send her on Valentine's Day. Now, the police, they wrong for this. On Valentine's Day, they send her the marriage certificate of Keyon and his new wife. They were wanting to see if, now knowing that he, not only is he free and not sitting in jail with you, but he's gone on and gotten married to a whole nother woman, is that going to make you turn? And it didn't. Her response was, I'm not surprised.
Yeah. That's interesting.
It is. It's really interesting. And so it is possible that she just did this on her own, hoping that she would win Keyon's heart, hoping that in light of the fact of getting Avis out of the way, that he would just naturally come to her. But we'll never know. I'm interested to know your thoughts. But, what we do know about Carla is that Carla had experienced a lot of relational hurt in the past. The father of her son, they were engaged, and on the day before the wedding, he calls it off. And so we know that, she had experienced a lot of heartbreak. And so maybe, and on the heels of that heartbreak, she meets Keyon.
You know how we often say, move on to the next, get up under another one. And that just is not the right advice. Because she moved on to Keyon, and it totally changed the
trajectory of her life
and the consequences therein. That still holds her accountable for her choices, but it just changed it forever. In lieu of all that we've said thus far and our thoughts about, Keyon, what is the takeaway for this case?
Well, I think the takeaway for this case is just because you have the freedom to do something doesn't mean you should do something. And so how does that relate to this case? Well, just because Keyon had the freedom to go have these extra relations with women doesn't mean that he needed to. Because if you really look at it, it starts with Keyon. But for Keyon getting into a relationship with someone other than Avis, at the time he was with Avis would not have been murdered. Carla would not be in jail. Like, his baby would not be dead. Like, it's but for his decision to go do that. He had the freedom to do what he did, because we all do. We have the freedom to choose however we want to choose. But he set in motion a domino effect that just took off and ruined so many people's lives. And people's lives were forever changed as a result of his poor choices. You just have to choose to do what's right. Even when choosing to do what's right doesn't necessarily feel good, or that ain't really what you want. If he didn't feel like Avis was the one, break up with Avis. Beat with all these. If you don't feel like you ready to settle down, don't settle down. Don't propose. Don't buy a house. Don't settle down. Don't do all of the things that say, I'm trying to be in a committed relationship. And that is where Keyon went wrong. And ultimately, that is where all of this started. It started with that poor choice. And that poor choice changed the trajectory of everybody else's life.
So that's our case for this week. I know that this is a popular case, and what's so interesting is that when DeWitt suggested it, I told MD, I'm like, we know this case. She was like, yeah. And she was like, I swore I did it. And I'm like, no, you did not.
But we both knew this case.
And it's a good case because it's so layered.
It is. And we did additional, we didn't go off of our simple knowledge. We did an extensive additional research to really just make sure that we gave you the meat of the case and understand all of the players involved in this case.
I want to remind you guys that we will be sending off gift cards on Friday. A lot of you have got back in contact with me since I gave that first announcement that you had a limited time only. And I will be sending those out to you guys on Friday. So until next time, this is Murder in the Black. Thank you.